Life at 74 follows a strange trajectory. It's like a river making a sudden turn just before it hits the sea. My turn came 6 months ago, when I finally decided to sell our old house in Northport's University District and buy a new one. The house that Helen and I had lived in for almost 45 years became a crypt of memories for me after her death. For 5 years, I woke up in our bedroom, ate breakfast in the kitchen where her favorite china cup still stood, and worked in the study looking at her picture. Every corner, everything reminded me of her, of our life together, of the evenings spent discussing my scientific articles, of her support when I spent months working on my biology monograph. It wasn't an easy decision. Brant, my son, insisted on selling the house 6 months after his mother's funeral. "Dad, you need something smaller," he said, eyeing the antique bookcases and antique furniture. "This house is too big for one person. Besides, it needs constant repairs." I knew it wasn't my comfort that bothered him, but the potential value of the property. Brent had never been known for sentimentality. The university neighborhood was becoming more and more prestigious, and the land beneath the old professors' houses was becoming more and more expensive. But I wasn't ready to part with a place where I could still feel Helen's presence. It's funny how life can surprise you sometimes. I, a biology professor who had devoted my life to studying ecological systems, a man for whom money had always been a means rather than an end, found myself with a rather large fortune. And this became a source of constant tension between me and my only son. It all started back in the 80s, when a colleague of mine in the department suggested that I invest some of my savings in the shares of several promising biotechnology companies. I agreed, more out of respect for his opinion than out of any real interest in investing. Then came the patents. 3 inventions developed in collaboration with colleagues from the lab. Nothing revolutionary, just improvements in techniques for examining plant tissue. But they were in demand by pharmaceutical companies. By the 90s, when my scientific papers were already recognized and my books were used as teaching aids in many universities, I found that my investment had increased tenfold. Helen always joked that I became a wealthy man by accident, doing what I really loved. Our lifestyle didn't change much from that. We allowed ourselves to travel to the places of biological research, which I described in my books, sometimes bought antique editions for my collection. The only major expense was paying for Brent's education at a prestigious business school. He'd always had a taste for money, unlike his parents. Perhaps that's the root of our problems. His son grew up in a professorial family where knowledge and intellectual achievement were valued above all else. But he himself dreamed of financial success and high status. After becoming an investment advisor, he often criticized my old-fashioned approach to money. "Father, you could triple your capital in 5 years with proper management," he would say when he learned of the size of my savings. Why? That question always stumped him. I have everything I need. Brent married Paisley 12 years ago. Bright, ambitious, with impeccable taste and a sharp tongue, she was just like him. Her work as a curator at a private art gallery gave her connections in the art world and wealthy collectors. Together, they gave the impression of the perfect couple from a glossy magazine. Beautiful, successful, always impeccably dressed. From the first meeting, Paisley looked at me as a relic of the past. She listened politely to me talk about my latest research, but there was a look of condescension in her eyes. To her, I was just an eccentric old man whose only virtue was the money he had accumulated. After Helen's death, their visits became even more intense. It was as if they were scouting the house, looking at my health with feigned concern, and then Brant would invariably bring up my finances. "Dad, you need to update your will," he said. "At your age, it's important to have all the paperwork in order." I realized that in his eyes, I was already 1 foot in the grave. Brent's 60th birthday wasn't about my health, but about my inheritance. The turning point came when I discovered he was consulting with a realtor behind my back about selling the house. The realtor, an old acquaintance of Helen's, had called me, believing he was acting with my knowledge. That call was the final straw. That same evening, I sat down and wrote a list of things I wanted to do in the remaining years of my life. The first item was, start over in a new place. My attorney, Miles, whom we'd been friends since our college days, helped me find a suitable house in a new neighborhood in Northport. A mansion on a hill overlooking the bay, with a spacious terrace and garden, unacceptable luxury for a humble professor, but affordable for someone with my savings. "Walter, are you sure?" Miles asked me when we looked at the house for the first time. "It's not really your style." "That's exactly why," I replied. "I want something completely new, without memories or familiar routes. The transaction was quick and quiet. I didn't tell Brent about my plans until the very last moment. When everything was signed and the old house was sold, I called him with the news. "What did you do?" His voice broke into a falsetto. "Sold the house? Without consulting me? And the new house? Where is it? How much did you pay for it?" $2 million. I felt a strange pleasure in his shocked reaction for the first time. There was a pause, during which I could almost physically feel the calculator in his head working. 2 million. Father, that's insane. You spent half of your savings on a house at your age? My savings will be enough for the rest of my life, even if I live to be 100 years old, I replied calmly. Besides, it's my life and my money, Brant. He started to say something about being fiscally irresponsible, but I interrupted him. Come to the housewarming party next Saturday if you want. I'll text you the address. The first weeks in the new house were like a strange dream. After decades in the old professorial neighborhood, I was suddenly in a neighborhood where my neighbors were successful businessmen, lawyers, and a few famous doctors. The house seemed too big and empty, with echoing footsteps in the hallways and too many unoccupied closets. But gradually I began to settle in. I moved my library, hundreds of scientific books, many autographed by authors. I created a study in one of the bedrooms, installing there my old desk, which remembered my thesis. I discovered that the terrace overlooking the bay was the perfect place for morning coffee and reading scientific journals. Brant and Paisley never showed up for the housewarming party, citing an urgent work trip. I didn't insist, feeling relieved at their absence. In their place came a few old colleagues from the university and a neighbor, an elderly widow who introduced herself as Martha, who brought a homemade pie and a bottle of fine wine. "There are a lot of people like us here," she said, circling the neighborhood. "Those who've decided they've earned the comfort of old age. Some people think we're snobs, but I just wanted quiet and a nice view." I liked her candor. After the guests left, Martha and I sat on the terrace until late at night, talking about books, traveling, and the oddities of old man life. She, as it turned out, was a professor of literature at the same university where I taught, only in a different department. The days were folding into a new routine. Morning walks around the neighborhood, working on a book before lunch, reading or meeting with colleagues after. Sometimes I went to classical music concerts at the local cultural center or exhibitions at a small gallery. Brant called 2 weeks after I moved in. "Dad, Paisley and I would like to finally see your new home," he said, curiosity in his voice. "Why don't we stop by this Saturday?" "Sure, I'd love to," I said, though I'd really rather spend the weekend working on another chapter of the book. "Great, then meet us for lunch. Paisley wants to bring wine. What kind do you like?" I almost laughed. In 30 years of dining together, neither Brant nor his wife had ever asked me about my tastes. They usually brought something they liked, and then were surprised to see that I didn't drink much. "Anything will do," I replied. "Come by 2 o'clock. I hung up the phone and looked around my new home. For the first time in a long time, it felt like my own, not a family nest full of ghosts of the past, but a place where I could be myself. A place where I didn't have to conform to the expectations of a deceased wife or a grown son. I didn't yet know that Brant and Paisley's visit would be the beginning of the real invasion. Had I known, perhaps I would have come up with a reason to postpone it. But the future is hidden from us for many reasons, and one of them is the mercy of fate. Tuesday morning greeted me with a knock on the door. I was sitting on the terrace with a cup of coffee and the manuscript I had been working on for the 3rd week. Outdated ideas about symbiotic relationships in forest ecosystems, a topic that is unlikely to interest the general public, but for a narrow circle of specialists could be an important contribution to the discussion. The knocking was repeated, more insistent. I put the manuscript aside and headed for the front door, wondering who it could be. Couriers usually left packages on the doorstep, and I wasn't expecting visitors. When I opened the door, I froze in surprise. Brant and Paisley stood on the doorstep, surrounded by suitcases and boxes. "Surprise!" Paisley stepped forward and pecked me on the cheek. She smelled like expensive perfume and some kind of citrus shampoo. Brant smiled, but his eyes remained wary. "Dad, we thought we'd come for a few days, help you get settled in. You're still unpacking, aren't you?" I was confused. It had only been 2 days since we'd talked about Saturday's visit. There was no way they were going to show up on a weekday, especially not with my things. "You didn't warn me," was all I could say. "We wanted it to be a surprise." Brant patted me on the shoulder and started dragging the suitcases into the hallway. Paisley took some time off work, and I can work remotely for a couple days. Thought you might need some help with this huge house. I tried to argue that I was doing just fine on my own, but they were already inside, commenting animatedly on the interior. Gosh, Walter, those curtains don't match the style of the house. Paisley looked critically around the living room. The front of the house is so Mediterranean, but inside, what is it? Victorian furniture? I moved some of the stuff from the old house, I explained. They're dear to me. Sentimentality is the enemy of good design, Paisley said. Brent, look at these chairs. They look like they belonged to Walter's grandfather. My son nodded, looking around the living room with an appraising eye. Daddy always loved old things, dear. But maybe in the new house we should start with a clean slate? He turned to me. We could help you pick out some new furniture, more modern. Thank you, but I'm quite happy with what I have. I tried to speak firmly, but without irritation. These chairs, by the way, were bought by your mother. They're comfortable and sturdy, even if they're not the latest trends. Paisley rolled her eyes, but didn't say anything. Instead, she headed toward the library, the spacious room where I'd set up my bookcases and desk. Oh my God, so many books, she exclaimed. They take up all the space. This room would make a great guest bedroom or media room. This is my library, I said, feeling my irritation rising. Most of these books are scholarly works, many autographed by the authors. They're essential to my work. At your age, you're still working? Paisley looked at me in surprise. I thought you were retired. I am retired, but I continue to write and research. There is no such thing as final retirement in science. Brant, meanwhile, was studying the view from the living room windows. It's an amazing view of the bay. This house is a great investment, Dad. Real estate in this neighborhood is only going up in value. That's it. Now I began to realize the real reason for their surprise visit. A $2 million house in an upscale neighborhood is too much to leave unattended. I didn't buy it as an investment, but as a place to live, I said. But yes, the location is great. I especially love the sunrises on the terrace. Speaking of the terrace, Paisley was already heading for the glass doors. It's perfect for parties. You can have barbecues with friends, summer cocktail parties. I don't do parties, I reminded her. And I don't have many friends here. That's because you just moved here, she said. You need to get to know your neighbors to fit in. There must be some interesting people living in a neighborhood like this. I didn't mention that I'd already met a few neighbors, including Martha, with whom I regularly had tea in the evenings. Paisley would hardly appreciate the company of a 70-year-old literature professor. The next few hours turned into a nightmare. Brant and Paisley walked through the house, looking in every room, opening closets and pulling out drawers as if they were taking an inventory. They commented on everything from the color of the walls to the arrangement of dishes in the kitchen. These plates don't match the decor at all, Paisley said, examining my set. And why do you need so many kitchen utensils? You hardly ever cook. I cook every day, I countered. And yes, these plates don't match the decor because I didn't choose them that way. Brent, meanwhile, was examining the contents of the refrigerator. Dad, why don't you have any real food? Just vegetables, yogurt, and some cereal. That's what normal food is, I was getting impatient. I'm health conscious and I prefer light plant-based meals. At your age, you need to eat a full diet, Brant said sternly. Protein, calcium. Paisley, we should go to the store and get Dad some groceries. And get some new curtains for the living room, she nodded. These just scream nursing home. I tried to intervene. Look, I appreciate your concern, but there's no buts, Dad, Brant interrupted. We're here to help, and we will. You're too stubborn to admit you need support. By lunchtime, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Paisley had already rearranged the living room furniture to improve the energy of the space, and Brant had reprogrammed the thermostat and security system because you set them up inefficiently, Dad. When I tried to get back to work on the manuscript, they followed me out to the terrace. What are you writing? Paisley asked, peering over my shoulder. Oh, it looks awfully boring. All those scientific terms and footnotes. It's my specialty, I said dryly. And yes, it can be boring to the uninitiated. No offense, Dad, Brent interjected. It's just that at your age, you could be doing something a little more relaxing. Memoirs, for instance, or gardening. I do what makes me happy, I replied. And my age has nothing to do with it. After the lunch they'd prepared in my kitchen, steaks and potatoes, though I would have preferred my usual salad, Paisley announced, We're going to the mall. We need to get groceries and look for new curtains. Are you coming with us? No, thanks. I was excited at the prospect of being alone for at least a couple hours. I still have a lot of work to do. Whatever you want, Paisley shrugged. Then we'll pick out what we need. When they left, I took a deep breath and went back to my manuscript, but it was hard to concentrate. I thought about how strange and unpleasant it felt to feel like an outsider in my own home, like I was a guest, and Brant and Paisley were the hosts. They returned 3 hours later, laden with bags. "Dad, we bought you new curtains, linens, and dishes," Brant announced, piling the purchases in the living room. "And groceries, of course. Real food." "I didn't ask you for that," I pointed out. "And I don't think I need new curtains or dishes." "Walter, you just can't see how outdated everything in your house is." Paisley was already pulling light beige curtains out of the bag. "They'll go much better with the furniture and give the room more light." "I like my curtains," I insisted. "They are thick and keep out the morning light when I want to sleep." "At your age, getting up at the crack of dawn is good for your health," Paisley countered. "Brent, help me take down the old curtains." I watched them take down the curtains I'd picked out a month ago, and I could feel the anger building up inside. But I held back. Fighting would only complicate the situation. The evening passed in the same fashion. Paisley rearranged things, Brant gave advice on space optimization, and I sat in the chair, feeling like a helpless observer. When the clock struck 10 p.m., I got up. "Well, it had been a busy day. I think it's time for me to get some rest. You have a long ride home ahead of you." Brant and Paisley looked at each other. "Actually, Dad, we were planning on staying the night," Brant said. "It's too late to drive back to town." "You didn't warn me," I pointed out. "And I hadn't prepared the guest room." "That's okay," Paisley smiled. "We'll get it ready ourselves." "Where do you keep the clean linens?" "In the guest bedroom closet, but—" "Great!" She was on her way to the stairs to the second floor. "Brent, grab our bags." I tried to object. "Look, I wasn't expecting overnight guests. Maybe some other time." "Dad," Brant put his hand on my shoulder, "are you kicking us out for the night? We came here to help you, to spend time with you. Isn't that what you've always wanted? For me to be more involved in your life?" He played on my guilt and I knew it, but I gave in anyway. "All right, stay. But I have work tomorrow, so I won't be able to entertain you all day." "Don't worry, we'll find something to do," Brant winked. "You have such a beautiful home, so much room for improvement." Walking up to my bedroom, I closed the door and sat down on the edge of the bed. I could hear Brant and Paisley's voices downstairs, discussing plans for tomorrow. Something about a barbecue on the patio and inviting friends over. I could feel the control of my own life slipping through my fingers. They barged in unannounced, remodeling my house to their liking, planning my life, all under the pretense of taking care of my old father. Paisley's laughter and Brant's muffled voice came from the room across the hall where they'd set up. I heard the words old-fashioned and stubborn. So strange. Just a couple weeks ago, I felt refreshed, ready to start a new chapter of life in this house. Now my own son and his wife have turned me into a guest in my home. And worst of all, I let it happen, unable to say no firmly. As I fell asleep, I thought about how tomorrow I needed to have a serious talk with them. Explain that I appreciate their concern, but I prefer to live my own way. That my home is my territory, my personal space. That at 74 I have the right to make my own decisions, even if they seem strange or old-fashioned to some. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this conversation wasn't going to happen, at least not tomorrow. I'd been giving in for too long, too used to the understanding father role. Brant knew my weaknesses and used them skillfully. The sound of furniture rearranging downstairs made me cringe. They weren't even trying to be quiet, believing that at my age I should be sleeping soundly. Another misconception about old age, one of many. I closed my eyes, trying to abstract myself from the noise. Tomorrow will be a new day, and perhaps I would have the resolve to regain control of my own life. I was awakened by the sound of furniture being moved and loud voices from the terrace. I glanced at my watch and saw that it was 10:30, unusually late for me, who was used to getting up at 6 in the morning. The night before, I had not been able to sleep for a long time, listening to the noises downstairs and thinking about the strange situation in which I found myself. Pulling on my robe, I went to the window. What I saw made me freeze in place. My patio was already bustling with activity. Brant was setting up a large grill I'd never seen before, apparently brought with him or bought this morning. And Paisley was setting up tables and chairs that were usually stored in the basement. But the amazing thing was that there were other people on the terrace and in the garden, at least a dozen. I dressed quickly and went downstairs. As I passed through the living room, I noticed that all my curtains had been replaced with new, light-colored ones, and the books from the coffee table had been removed and replaced with some glossy albums. "Ah, there you are." Paisley spotted me first when I stepped out onto the terrace. "Good morning, sleepyhead. We decided not to wake you. At your age, sleep is so important. What's going on here?" I asked, looking around at the strangers who were already making themselves at home in my garden. "Surprise!" Brant exclaimed, approaching with a glass in his hand. "We're having a barbecue. We thought we'd introduce you to our friends in the Paisley family. A lot of people have been wanting to see your new home for a long time." "But you didn't warn me." My voice was quiet, but there was resentment building inside. "Because it's a surprise, Dad." Brant clapped me on the shoulder. "Go meet Henry and Liz, who are Paisley's uncle and aunt on Mom's side, and over there are her cousins and their wives, and these are our friends from work." He kept listing names, which I promptly forgot. One thought pulsed in my head. Strangers had taken over my house, without permission, without warning. An older woman with bright red hair, I think it was Aunt Liz, approached me with a glass of wine. "So you're Brent's father. We've heard a lot about you. What a lovely house you've bought. The view of the bay, and it's in an upscale neighborhood. Paisley said you were a professor?" "Still a professor," I corrected. "Although retired. I taught biology at the university." "How nice." She was clearly not listening. "And this terrace is perfect for parties." Paisley said she's planning a complete redesign of the landscaping. You know, modern minimalism instead of those old-fashioned flower beds. I blinked, trying to comprehend what I was hearing. Paisley was planning to redo my garden? "Oh, that was probably a surprise," Liz laughed. "But it's going to be gorgeous. Imagine, stone paths, ornamental grasses, maybe even a Japanese garden. It's so trendy right now." I wanted to argue that my old-fashioned flower beds were specially selected native plants that I'd chosen with a botanist from the university. But Liz had already left, swept away by a wave of other guests. The next hour passed like a blur. I moved among strangers, answering questions about home, my former job, my future plans. Everyone seemed to think I should be thrilled about such an unexpected celebration. No one even considered that I might have preferred to spend Saturday morning at my desk working on a manuscript. At one point, I found myself standing next to a group of men, including Brant. They were standing a little ways away, at the edge of the garden, sipping whiskey that I'm sure they'd gotten from my bar. "Great location," said one of them, a tall man in an expensive linen suit. "Such a view of the bay. These houses are only going to go up in value." "Exactly," Brent nodded. "It could double in value in 5 or 10 years. It's a great investment." "But the interior design needs some serious modernization," said another man. "All those old bookcases, heavy furniture." "Paisley's already drawing up a renovation plan," Brent grinned. "Most of the furniture will have to be replaced, of course, and the library could be turned into a home theater. Who needs all those books?" I froze, not believing my ears. They were talking about remodeling my house like they already owned it. "When do you plan to start remodeling?" A third man I hadn't noticed before asked. Brent lowered his voice, but I could still hear every word. "We can't yet. The old man's too attached to his things. But, you know, at his age..." He tapped his finger meaningfully on his temple. "Paisley says he might need a guardianship. He's already mixing up dates, forgetting names." I stepped back, feeling the blood rush to my face. Guardianship? They're going to declare me incompetent? Me, whose last article was published in an international scientific journal only 3 months ago? Without attracting attention, I slipped back into the house through the side door. I needed time to think, to make a decision. The situation had spiraled out of control much faster than I could have anticipated. In the library, I closed the door and sat down at the desk. My hands were trembling slightly. I glanced at Helen's picture on the desk. She was always more determined than I was. "What would you do if you were me?" I mentally asked. The answer came instantly. Helen would never have let the situation get this far. She would have nipped it in the bud, firmly and decisively. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Miles Edwards," a familiar voice answered. "Miles, this is Walter Aldridge." "Walter!" There was genuine surprise in his voice. "I haven't heard from you in a long time. How's your new home?" Miles wasn't just my lawyer. We'd been friends since we were students. He helped me with all the paperwork when I bought my new house. "The house is beautiful, but I'm in trouble," I explained the situation briefly. Miles's voice grew more and more serious as I explained. "Are you sure you understood their conversation correctly? About custody?" Absolutely. And these aren't the first warning signs. They're acting like they already own the house, rearranging things, planning renovations. I understand, Miles said quietly. I have a suggestion. Remember when we discussed changing your will after you bought the house? You said you wanted to leave most of the money to a research program for young scientists. I remember, but we didn't formalize it. I've prepared the paperwork, and it's waiting for your signature. Also, we can get a restraining order to come to your house uninvited. Given the current circumstances, we have grounds. I've been thinking, such a move would mean a final break with my son. But after what I overheard, did I have a choice? Do it, I said firmly. How soon can you get here with the documents? I'll be there in an hour. Oh, and Walter, I think we're going to need the police. If you have uninvited guests in your house who refuse to leave. Okay, I feel strangely calm. Call the police. Finished talking, I took a deep breath. Well, Brant and Paisley had arranged a surprise for me. Now it was my turn. Through the library window, I could see a full-blown party had already started on the terrace. Someone was playing music, meat was grilling, glasses were being filled with wine from my cellar. No one even noticed my absence. I spent an hour going through documents on the computer collecting all the financial statements, records of meetings with Brent and Paisley, their messages and letters over the years. Strangely, it was as if I'd been preparing for this moment, saving every evidence of their dismissive attitude, every hint of their plans for my property. When two cars appeared in the driveway, one familiar, Miles, the other a police car, I felt my pulse quicken. Too late for doubts, I said to myself as I headed for the front door. Miles greeted me with a firm handshake. Standing next to him were two police officers, a middle-aged man with a serious expression and a young woman in uniform. Mr. Aldridge, the officer addressed me. We received a report of a disturbance at your house. Can you explain the situation? Of course, officer, I spoke calmly and clearly. My son and his wife arrived yesterday uninvited, stayed overnight against my objections, and today they threw a party, inviting about 20 people, also without my consent. I demand that all uninvited guests leave my private property. The policemen looked at each other. Did you try to ask them to leave? There's no point in asking, Miles interjected. My client overheard a conversation in which his son was discussing plans to take custody of him and take possession of the house. We have reason to believe that they will not comply with a simple request. The officer nodded. I see. In that case, we'll make sure everyone leaves the property. But first, I need to make sure that this house really belongs to you. I showed the house documents and my ID card. Satisfied with the verification, the officers walked with me and Miles to the terrace. The arrival of the police had the effect of a bomb going off. The music stopped instantly. The conversation stopped. All eyes were on us. Brant broke away from the group and quickly approached. What's going on? He asked, looking from the police officers to me. Dad, what happened? There's been a misunderstanding, Mr. Aldridge, the officer said calmly. Your father did not authorize this event and is asking all guests to leave his private property. Brent's face showed disbelief, then anger. What is this nonsense? This is a family barbecue. Dad, tell them it's okay. Nothing's okay, Brent. I looked him straight in the eye. You and Paisley broke into my house, started rearranging furniture, replacing curtains, and now you're throwing a party for people I don't even know, all without my consent. Paisley came over to us, her face a look of alarm and annoyance at the same time. Walter, there's been a misunderstanding. We wanted to do something nice for you, to help you socialize. I heard your conversation, I interrupted, about how you plan to modernize the house when it's yours, about how you're going to get custody of me. Paisley's face paled and Brant swallowed nervously. Dad, you misunderstood. I got it right, I stepped forward. And I have a surprise for you too. Miles? My friend and lawyer pulled some papers out of his briefcase. I've made changes to the will, I continued, feeling strangely pleased by the shocked expressions on their faces. Most of my estate will now be used to establish a research program for young biologists, and this house will be sold after my death, with the proceeds going to the same foundation. You can't, Brent started, but I raised my hand to stop him. Yes, I can. I am of sound mind, as attested to by my attorney and the independent psychiatrist I met with last week, anticipating possible, misunderstandings. Brent's face contorted with anger. You're disinheriting your own son? For what? Some students you don't even know? And besides, Miles added, ignoring his question, Mr. Aldridge has obtained a restraining order that forbids you and your wife from approaching his house without a written invitation. Here's a copy. He held out the document to Brent. The officer has the original. Paisley let out a sound that sounded like a sob. This is crazy, she exclaimed. We just wanted to help. Walter, don't you realize what you're doing? I know exactly what I'm doing, I said firmly. Now I'm asking everyone to leave my house. Now. The officer stepped forward. You heard the master of the house. I ask everyone to gather their belongings and leave the property. Otherwise, we will be forced to enforce the trespassing law. There was a tense silence. Then the guests began to move slowly, gathering bags, phones, and unfinished glasses. Faces were confused, shocked. I heard scraps of phrases. Such a scandal. I didn't think the old man would react like that. Poor Brant. Paisley, pale with rage, came toward me. You're going to regret this, Walter. We cared for you. Who's going to be there for you when you get worse? When you can't walk down the stairs or cook your own meals? I'll get a nurse, I said calmly. You never took care of me, Paisley. You cared about my money and the house you wanted. She recoiled as if I'd hit her. Brant grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the exit. Let's go, honey. There's nothing more for us to do here. 20 minutes later, the house was empty. The cops, after making sure all the guests had left, said their goodbyes and left too. Miles and I were the only ones left. Are you all right? He asked, looking at me anxiously. I glanced around the terrace, which was littered with trash, uneaten food, and glasses. The curtains in the house had been replaced, the furniture rearranged, my books removed from the tables. You know what, Miles? I smiled. I feel better than I have in years. The first few days after the incident with the police passed in a strange calm. I tidied up the house, putting back the curtains I'd managed to save, arranging the furniture in a way that made me feel comfortable. Miles helped me organize a professional cleanup. The barbecue marks on the terrace were not so easy to remove. On the third day, the calls started coming in. At first, I just didn't pick up the phone when I saw Brant's name on the screen. Then I decided to listen to the voicemails. There were 8 in one day. Dad, we need to talk. What happened is a misunderstanding. Call me back. Walter, this is Paisley. We're very concerned about your behavior. Calling the police on your own family is not normal. You need help, not isolation. Dad, do you realize what you've done? You humiliated us in front of our friends, in front of the Paisley family. People say you've lost your mind. Is that true? Or have you just decided to get back at us for something? What for, Dad? With each new message, the tone became more and more irritated, accusing. In the last one, left late last night, Brant was already blatantly threatening. If you think you can just disinherit me and shut me out of the family, you're wrong. We will contest the will. We have evidence of your inadequacy. You kicked us out of the house with the police. You think that's normal behavior? We'll find doctors who can prove you're incapable of managing your own affairs. Don't take this to court, Dad. Call me. I erased all messages and blocked Brant and Paisley's numbers. Strangely, I felt no anger or resentment, just fatigue and mild disappointment. I had once dreamed that my son would follow in my footsteps, share my passion for science, for knowledge. Then, when it became clear that this would not happen, I hoped at least for respect. Now even this illusion has dissipated. A week after the party, I found an official letter from a lawyer in my mailbox. Brant and Paisley intended to file a petition to have me declared incompetent and to have Brant appointed my guardian. They cited my unstable behavior, paranoia, and inability to adequately assess the situation. I immediately called Miles. They're bluffing, he said after listening to me. They don't stand a chance. You underwent a full medical examination only 2 months ago, and you initiated a psychiatric evaluation yourself before changing your will. Plus, you have a strong academic record, publications. No court would find you incompetent. They claim they have witnesses to my unstable behavior, I remarked. Who? Guests at the party who were themselves uninvited visitors to your house? Miles grinned. Don't worry, Walter. It's an attempt to intimidate you, to get you to back down. My conversation with Miles had calmed me down, but it still left an unpleasant residue. My own son was willing to declare me crazy for money. It was painful to realize. That same evening, I decided to call an old colleague, Professor Alan Kingsley, with whom I had once taught and conducted research together. We hadn't seen each other in almost 3 years, not since he had invited me to his 70th birthday party, and Brant had convinced me not to go, citing my not feeling well. Walter, Alan sounded genuinely surprised and pleased. What a surprise. I thought you'd moved out of town or, he hesitated, or died. I couldn't contain my laughter. Well, you disappeared so suddenly. Stopped coming to faculty meetings, didn't respond to invitations. I took a deep breath. It's a long story, Alan. If you have time, I'd like to get together. Perhaps have dinner together? I'd love to. How about tomorrow night? At our old place, Frank's? Great. I could feel the tension of the last few days receding a little. 7 o'clock? The next day was the first time in a long time I felt excited about going to a meeting. It was almost like getting ready for a date. I carefully picked out a shirt, shined my old but favorite shoes, even considered a tie, but decided it would be too much for an informal meeting. Frank's was a small Italian restaurant near the university campus. My colleagues and I had once gathered there regularly on Fridays, discussing research, faculty gossip, and complaining about students and administration. Those were good times. Alan was already waiting for me at a table in the corner. He hadn't changed much. The same piercing blue eyes, the same neat gray beard, just more wrinkles and slumped shoulders. Walter! He stood up, shaking my hand firmly. You're looking good. Nothing's changed, huh? Except for the amount of hair on your head, I grinned, taking a seat across from him. We ordered wine, the good red we'd always preferred in the old days, and for the first half hour we just exchanged news. Alan was still teaching, though he'd reduced his load to one course a semester. His latest book had won an award for Best Popular Science Book in Biology. I congratulated him heartily. Alan had always had an amazing gift for explaining complex scientific concepts in simple terms. What about you? He finally asked. I hear you bought a house in Highland Hills. That's a big move, expensive neighborhood. I nodded and began to talk first about the house, then about the latest research I'd been working on, and finally about the recent events with Brent and Paisley. Alan listened intently, not interrupting, only occasionally shaking his head or frowning. You know, Walter, he said when I finished, I never wanted to tell you, but your son, back when he was still coming to faculty events, he always gave the impression of a man who was ashamed of his father. I shuddered. That was unexpected. What do you mean? Remember the environmental conference where you were the keynote speaker? Brant came with Paisley, and they were sitting in the back row. I happened to be there, and I heard her whispering to him, "Can't your father talk less boring? It's like a funeral." And he said, "I know, embarrassing, but we have to show up or he'll be offended again." I remembered that day. I was so glad that Brant had come to hear my lecture. I thought he was really interested. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Alan shrugged. What would it have changed? It would have only upset you. Besides, I understood him to some extent. Children of professors often live in their parents' shadows. It's not easy. But to turn that into manipulation, into trying to control my life, my finances, that's beyond the line, Alan said firmly. And you were right to set boundaries. I'm proud of you, Walter. A lot of people in your position would just accept it, let themselves be controlled under the pretense that he was my son. His support meant more to me than I could ever express. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I did the right thing, not selfishly, not out of revenge, but in defense of my dignity and the right to my own life. You know, since I retired, I admitted, sometimes I feel like I've lost myself. It's like I've gone from Professor Aldridge, respected biologist, to just Brent's rich dad. That's because you've allowed yourself to isolate yourself. Alan leaned across the table toward me. We've all missed you, Walter. Faculty meetings aren't the same without your sarcasm and accurate remarks. And the students, gosh, they're still quoting your lectures and asking when you'll be back with at least a guest appearance. Really? I was genuinely surprised. Absolutely. The dean has offered you an honorary position 3 times, but you haven't responded to the letters. I vaguely remembered a few letters from the university that I'd glimpsed on my desk. Brant had said at the time that he would sort the mail for me, so as not to bore me with paperwork. I didn't get those offers, I said quietly. Alan looked at me carefully, then nodded understandingly. That was it. You know, I could put you in touch with the dean again. The offer still stands, I'm sure. We talked until the restaurant closed. Alan talked about the latest research in the department, new directions in biology, talented young scientists. I listened, asked questions, argued, and with each passing minute I felt that part of my personality that seemed to have been lost after retirement was coming back to me. "We need to do this again," Alan said, as we said our goodbyes outside the restaurant. "And next time I'll bring Margaret and John. They'll be thrilled to have you back with us." Margaret Chen and John Becker were two other colleagues with whom we were once close. John was my co-author on several papers, and Margaret was a brilliant ecologist whose research I had always deeply respected. "It would be my pleasure," I replied sincerely. "Maybe next Friday?" I returned home at almost midnight feeling refreshed. For the first time in a long time, I spent the evening talking to people who valued me for my intelligence, for my knowledge and accomplishments, not for money or status. As I fell asleep, I thought that perhaps this painful break with Brent and Paisley was necessary. It freed me from being an ATM and a future inheritance, and allowed me to be myself again. The next morning I awoke to the doorbell ringing. On the doorstep stood a courier with a large envelope. "Professor Aldridge?" he asked. "Delivery from the law firm of Harris, Bloom and Associates." I signed the receipt and opened the envelope as soon as I closed the door. Inside was an official letter. Brant and Paisley had filed a petition with the court to have me declared incompetent. A hearing was scheduled in a month. Instead of panic or fear, I felt a strange calm. I knew I was right, that I was competent and healthy. I had proof, medical reports, witnesses, my research papers from the last few years. And I had Miles, who would not allow my son to manipulate the court. I called Alan. "Remember what you said about the dean's offer? I'd like to take it, sooner the better." "Great," Alan exclaimed. "I'll contact him today. But what's the hurry?" "I'll tell you when I see him," I said. "By the way, how would you feel about inviting Margaret and John to dinner at my house this Friday? I'll show you my new house and we can talk about it." After talking to Alan, I sat down at my computer and began to compile a list of all the publications, speeches, and research projects I had completed over the past 5 years. It was impressive. Then I added the names of colleagues who could attest to my scholarly activity and clarity of mind. Alan, Margaret, John, 5 other professors with whom I corresponded. I then contacted Miles and sent him this list along with a copy of the lawsuit. "Great job, Walter," Miles said when he called me back an hour later. "With this set of witnesses and evidence, they don't stand a chance. But be prepared. It's going to be a messy trial. Brant and Paisley will try to make you look bad." "I'm ready," I said confidently. "You know, Miles, I've tried to be a good father for years. Supported Brant financially, stayed out of his life, even when I saw him making mistakes. I realized now it wasn't caring, it was weakness. I was afraid of losing him, afraid of being all alone. And now? I realize now that I was never really alone. I have my colleagues, my friends, my research. I'll go back to teaching, at least partially. I'm going to do the things that really matter." "I'm glad to hear that," Miles sounded genuinely pleased. "Then we'll fight." "We will," I confirmed. "And Miles, thank you." When I finished talking, I went out onto the terrace and took a deep breath of the fresh morning air. The view of the bay was beautiful on this clear day. For the first time since moving in, I felt that this house was truly mine, not a temporary shelter, not an investment, but a place where I could be myself, live my life on my terms. Strangely, I'm almost grateful to Brent and Paisley. Their intrusion into my life, their attempts to control me, made me finally realize how much I had been giving in all these years. How I'd allowed myself to be manipulated out of fear of losing my only son. Now that fear was gone, I knew I could handle whatever happened next. I went back to my office, turned on my computer, and opened the file with my latest manuscript. The work was waiting, and I was finally ready to fully immerse myself in it, without guilt, without doubt, without looking back at other people's expectations. It had been 3 weeks since I had received the subpoena. A lot has changed in that time. I accepted the dean's offer and agreed to teach a graduate student seminar once a week. My first lecture was a full house. The auditorium was packed to capacity, with many students sitting on the steps and windowsills. It was an incredibly uplifting experience. I also reconnected with a circle of old colleagues. The dinner to which I invited Alan, Margaret, and John grew into a weekly tradition. We would meet at my place or one of them, discussing the latest research, arguing about scientific theories, just enjoying each other's company. It was as if those years of loneliness had never happened. Miles kept me regularly updated on the trial preparations. The chances of Brant and Paisley finding me incompetent were slim to none, but the trial itself promised to be unpleasant. They hired an expensive attorney known for his aggressive tactics. One overcast Tuesday afternoon, as I returned home from a seminar, I noticed a familiar car in the driveway. Brant's silver BMW was parked right at the boundary of my lot, exactly where the restraining order began. I sighed, preparing myself for an unpleasant conversation. The last thing I wanted to do right now was confront my son, but there was no avoiding the meeting. Brent stood outside his car, hands shoved in the pockets of his expensive coat. Without Paisley, which was already unusual, they'd rarely appeared separately in recent years. "Dad," he said when I got out of the car, "we need to talk." I nodded, but didn't make a move toward him. Brent was standing right on the edge of the restraining order, and I didn't want to give him an excuse to cross that line. "We can talk here," I said, leaning against my car. "Or you could call like normal people." Brant wrinkled his nose. "You blocked my number. Paisley's number too." "Right," I didn't deny the obvious. After the flood of threats and accusations, it seemed reasonable. He took a deep breath, as if gathering his strength. "Look, Dad, we didn't mean for it to come to this. This whole court situation, the injunction, it's not what a normal family wants. We're worried about you." I raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Brant continued, "Maybe we've been too pushy in trying to help you with the house. Paisley can be overly enthusiastic about design. And this party, we really thought you'd enjoy socializing with new people. You didn't have to call the police right away." "Are you trying to apologize?" I asked bluntly. Brant hesitated. "I'm trying to explain that we meant well, and now I want to propose a truce. Let's forget this unpleasant episode. We drop the lawsuit, you lift the injunction, and reinstate the old will. Paisley and I promise to respect your space and call before we visit. So here's the deal. No real apology, just a tentative deal. What about your plans to modernize my house after I die, and the list of things you were going to sell?" I asked bluntly, watching his reaction. Brant's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly pulled himself together. "What are you talking about?" "I heard your conversation during that ill-fated party. You were discussing with your friends how you were going to convert the library into a home theater, how you were going to get rid of the old bookcases. Who needs all those books, right?" Brant turned pale, but then he stubbornly lifted his chin. "It was just a conversation, Dad. People say things after a couple glasses of wine. It doesn't mean we really planned." "Don't lie to me," I interrupted him, feeling a wave of anger rising inside. "Not after all this. Be honest for once in your life." There was silence for a moment. Then Brant apparently decided to change tactics. "Okay," his voice got harder. "Yes, we talked about what we're going to do with the house. So, it's natural. It's a huge house with an old-fashioned layout. Of course, we thought about how to make it more modern and functional. And my things? My books? Collections? Furniture?" Brant shrugged. "Most of it's outdated, Dad. Who needs paper books now when you can download everything electronically? And your collections? They're dust collectors, frankly." I felt a chill run down my spine. Even now, when he needed to placate me, he couldn't hide his contempt for what I valued. "And you think you have the right to decide the fate of my things?" "I'm going to inherit them anyway." He paused, apparently remembering the new will. "I mean, until recently they were supposed to. Look, Dad, I'm your only son. Who else are you leaving all this to? Some research program? They won't even remember your name after they get the money." I looked at him and I didn't see a 46-year-old man. I saw a cranky teenager who was always more interested in material possessions than in real relationships. "It's not about money, Brent," I said quietly. "It's about respect. It's that you never appreciated what was important to me." "I appreciate you," he objected. "You're my father. I just want you to live a comfortable life, to be safe." "You also wanted to declare me incompetent," I reminded him. "Was that out of concern too?" Brent was embarrassed, but he quickly found himself. "We were really worried about your condition. You called the police on your own family, kicked us out of the house. That's not normal behavior. So asserting your boundaries is a sign of mental illness? Interesting logic." "You're twisting my words." He was starting to lose his patience. "We were concerned about the dramatic change in your behavior. You've always been cooperative, calm, and then all of a sudden you're so aggressive." "Not aggression, self-respect," I corrected, "which I've been really lacking for the last few years. You know, I blame myself for not being a perfect father, for being so caught up in my work that I missed your childhood, for failing to instill in you a love of knowledge, of science." Brent frowned but didn't say anything. "I wanted the relationship so badly that I let you and Paisley manipulate me," I continued. "Gave money when you asked for it, didn't mind when you interfered in my life. But I see now that it was a mistake." "We never manipulated you." His voice turned cold. We cared. And if you asked for financial help sometimes, what's the big deal? Isn't that what family is for? I shook my head. Family is for love, support, respect, and money. It's just money. It's no substitute for a real relationship. We've always supported you, Brent objected. You have? I looked him straight in the eye. When was the last time you asked about my work, about my research, about the book I'm writing? He faltered, clearly trying to remember such an occasion. I have a life, Dad. Work, Paisley. I can't always be interested in your science stuff. You don't have to be all the time. It would be enough to take a genuine interest once in a while instead of pretending to care. Brent was clearly losing patience. The reconciliation plan wasn't working, and his true motives were becoming more and more apparent. Okay, let's say I didn't show enough interest in your work. Is it really worth destroying our family? To disinherit your own son? So we're back to square one. All his worry, all his concern. It was all about the money, the inheritance. Tell me honestly, Brent, if I were just an ordinary biology professor with no significant savings, would you be fighting as hard for a place in my life? He opened his mouth to object, but I held up my hand. And please don't insult my intelligence with another lie. We both know the answer. Several emotions flashed across his face: anger, embarrassment, calculation. Finally, he settled for relative honesty. Look, I'm not going to pretend that money isn't important. Of course it is. I've got my own plans, my own projects, my own obligations to Paisley. We were counting on the inheritance, yes, but that doesn't mean we don't care about you. That care was when you were discussing how you would dispose of my things after I died, I reminded her. What you'd sell, what you'd throw away, how you'd remodel my house. Paisley and I have different tastes, different lifestyles, he shrugged. What's so strange about that? What's strange is that you discussed it when I was alive and well. It's like you couldn't wait for me to die. Brent couldn't find anything to say. We stood across from each other, father and son, separated not only by the border of the restraining order, but also by a chasm of misunderstanding and different values. You know what the saddest part is? I finally said. I always hoped that one day you would understand and appreciate my work. Not because I wanted you to follow in my footsteps, but because it's a part of me, an important part. But you always didn't care. To you, I was not a scientist, not a professor, an author of books and articles, but just a source of money. That's not fair, Brand objected, but without much conviction. And making a list of things you'll sell after I die is fair? I pulled a folded sheet of paper out of my pocket. One of your guests at that party, Aunt Paisley, I think, forgot this on the parlor table. Brant turned pale as he recognized the sheet. It's not what you think it is. List of items for auction, I read out. Antique desk, approximate value 15 to 20,000. A collection of first editions of scientific papers. Evaluate with a specialist. Silver service, 8 to 10,000. Shall I go on? He was silent, obviously not knowing how to respond to direct evidence. You know what's interesting about this list, Brent? There's not a single thing on here that you might want to keep as a memento of your father. Not a single thing. All for sale. That says a lot about our relationship, don't you think? Paisley made that list, not me, he finally said. And you didn't know about it? Didn't approve? I looked him straight in the eye. Please, at least be honest right now. Brent looked away. We were just discussing options. That didn't mean we were going to sell everything. And my scientific legacy? Manuscripts, notes, unpublished research? He shrugged. Honestly, no one would be interested in that, Dad. Your field is too narrow, too specialized. We were thinking of turning the papers over to the university if they want them. And if they don't, well, they're just old records. His words hurt more than I expected. Sure, I wasn't Einstein or Darwin, but my research mattered. It contributed to science. And to my own son, they were just old records. You know, Brant, I said quietly, I've long blamed myself for the fact that we're not close. Thought I spent too much time on work, not enough on family. But now I see that it's more than that. We're just very different people. We have different values, different outlooks on life. And maybe it would be easier for both of us if we just admit it. You're giving up on me? There was genuine resentment in his voice. Your only son? I'm not giving up on you. I'm just stopping pretending that we have a relationship that we never had. And I stopped letting myself be used for money. What about forgiveness? Second chances? Isn't that what you taught me when I was a kid? I gave you plenty of chances, I said. And each time you proved that you are only interested in material values. I won't blame you for that anymore. Maybe it's just your nature. But I won't indulge you. Brent clenched his fists, his face contorted with anger. So that's it? You're choosing money over your own son? No, Brent. You chose money over a relationship with your father. I just finally admitted it. We stared at each other across the invisible boundary that separated us. I felt strangely calm, despite the pain of realizing that my son and I were finally strangers to each other. You're going to regret this, Brant finally said. When you're alone, when you need help, when you need care, no one will come. Your precious coworkers won't drive you to doctor's appointments or help with the house. Maybe, I agreed. But I'd rather be alone with fake care, whose only purpose is to get my money. Brant shook his head, his gaze cold and calculating. You know, our lawyer says we have a good chance. Your behavior over the last few months, the sudden change in your will, the calling the police, the paranoia about us wanting to take possession of your house. These are all signs of an unstable condition. Good luck with that argument, I smiled without much mirth. Miles has medical reports, testimonials from colleagues and students, my recent publications. Not to mention the list you made when you planned to sell off my estate while I was still alive. I wonder what the judge will say about that. Brent's face contorted with rage. That damn house. If you hadn't bought it, everything would have been like it was before. We were a normal family. We were never a normal family, Brant, I shook my head. We were just pretending. He turned abruptly and walked to his car. This isn't over, he said over his shoulder. You're going to regret your decision. I watched his BMW pull into the driveway, tires shrieking as it rounded the bend. Despite the threats and the impending trial, I felt only tired and strangely relieved. It was as if a long overdue abscess had finally burst, freeing me from pain and uncertainty. I returned to the house feeling that I had turned an important page in my life. For the first time, I faced the truth without regrets or illusions. My son had never appreciated me as a human being, a scientist, a thinker. For him, I was just a source of money and inheritance, and I finally found the strength to admit it. Autumn in Northport is especially beautiful. Today, looking out over the bay from the terrace, colored in the golden tones of the setting sun, I thought about how much had changed in the last 5 months. It seemed unbelievable that back in the spring, I was a lonely old man, trapped in my own home not so much physically as emotionally. I didn't know then that the decision to change my life would be the beginning of a new, unexpectedly bright phase. I did not know that breaking up with my son, despite all the pain, would bring liberation, and that returning to academia would energize me. The trial that Brant and Paisley had so frightened me of took place at the beginning of the summer. It went even faster than Miles and I had expected. The judge, an older woman with a discerning eye, scrutinized all the materials and dismissed the lawsuit to declare me incompetent. She was particularly impressed with my recent scientific publications and my resumption of teaching. Professor Aldridge demonstrates a clarity of thought and intellectual vigor that would be the envy of many people half his age, she said, concluding the hearing. There is no basis for restricting his capacity. Brant and Paisley sat stone-faced. Their lawyer tried to appeal to my eccentric behavior, to the call to the police, to the sudden change in the will, but each argument was shattered by facts and evidence. When the judge mentioned the list of items for the auction that Paisley had compiled while I was still alive, I noticed some in the audience shaking their heads disapprovingly. After the trial, Brant tried to approach me, but Miles politely reminded him of the restraining order in effect. I hadn't seen my son since, but as it turned out, our story didn't end there. 3 weeks ago, my colleague Alan called me with unusual news. Walter, do you know that your son has been going around the faculty telling everyone about your supposedly progressive dementia? I wasn't surprised at the fact, rather that Brant had decided to attack me in a professional setting. And does anyone believe him? Not many people who know you, Alan grinned. But he specifically seeks out people who haven't talked to you in a while, or new teachers. He tells heartbreaking stories about how his father, once a brilliant scientist, now can't remember the names of his loved ones and makes dangerous decisions for himself. Funny, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony of the situation. Meanwhile, this dementia-stricken old man had just been invited to lecture at an international conference. That's what I'm talking about, Alan laughed. No one who's seen you in the last few months would believe that nonsense. But I thought you should know. I thanked him and called Miles right away. He wasn't surprised. After losing in court, all they can do is try to smear you, he said. But legally, they're powerless. If you want, We can think about protecting your reputation if their rumors start to seriously hurt. But instead of frustration or anger, I felt a strange calm. Brant and Paisley could no longer hurt me. They had become a part of the past, a painful but survivable part. Now, as I watched the light play on the water, I thought about how my life had filled up over the months. After returning to university with a part-time teaching load, I suddenly found that my expertise was still in demand. Young researchers came for advice, brought their projects, and asked questions. At first, it was students from my seminar. Then the information spread more widely. And now every week I spent several hours discussing promising research in biology. I was particularly interested in a project by a young graduate student, Laura Chen, studying the effects of climate change on forest ecosystems. Her approach was fresh, and her enthusiasm was infectious. I agreed to be a consultant to her work, and we now met twice a week to discuss field research and methodology. "Professor Aldridge, you have no idea how important your help has been," she said at our last meeting. "Your experience and intuition reveal aspects to me that I would never have noticed on my own." These words warmed my soul. It is nice to know that even at 74, you can be useful. You can pass on knowledge to the next generation of scientists. In addition to consulting, I started writing a popular science book about the hidden interrelationships in nature, how seemingly imperceptible changes in one species can lead to a cascade of consequences for an entire ecosystem. The idea came after a conversation with Martha, my neighbor, who confided that she had always been interested in biology, but found scientific articles too difficult to understand. "You're so fascinating about these interconnections, Walter," she said. "Why not write a book for ordinary people? I think a lot of people would like to understand nature in a deeper way, but not everyone can wade through the scientific terminology." The idea took hold of me. I started writing, trying to explain complex concepts in accessible language, illustrating them with clear examples. The work flowed easily and joyfully. To my surprise, several publishers were interested in the project, and now I had a contract with a small but respected popular science publisher. My social circle expanded as well. Regular meetings with colleagues from the university, new acquaintances through Marta, who turned out to be a socially active person and constantly invited me to various events, from chamber concerts to literary evenings. It was at one of these evenings that I met Eleonora, the widow of a famous conductor, a woman of amazing intelligence and fine taste. We quickly found a common language, discovering similar views on art, literature, and life in general. "At our age, it's so rare to meet people with whom you can talk without adjusting for the years," she said one of our evenings together over a glass of wine on my terrace. "Most are either stuck in the past or trying to clumsily imitate the youth. With you, you can just be yourself." Eleanor didn't replace Helen for me. It would have been impossible. But she brought new joy, new perspectives, and most importantly, a sense that life goes on, that even at 74, you can meet a soulmate. 2 weeks ago, I received a letter from Miles. Attached was a copy of a new lawsuit from Brant and Paisley. This time they were trying to contest my last will and testament, claiming that I had signed it under the influence of unknown third parties and hadn't understood the consequences of my actions. "It's just a desperate attempt," Miles commented over the phone. "They don't have any proof, but be prepared that they won't stop. It might be worth gathering further evidence of your capacity at the time of the change of will." I agreed with him and began methodically gathering materials, copies of my research articles published in recent years, peer reviews, conference invitations. I asked the dean of the faculty to provide written evidence of my teaching activities. I went through old emails from Brant and Paisley discussing my finances and assets, taking screenshots of the most revealing passages. But the most interesting thing happened yesterday. I received a surprise visit from Timothy Lang, a longtime friend of Brant's who was among the guests at that ill-fated barbecue party. "Professor Aldridge," he began, clearly nervous, "I have a confession to make. Brant asked me to testify about your allegedly erratic behavior at that party. He wanted me to testify in court that you were disoriented, aggressive, didn't understand what was going on." I looked at him carefully, waiting for him to continue. I agreed because he's my friend. But then, I did a lot of thinking. What's going on is wrong. You seemed like a perfectly adequate person, just angry at the intruders. I'd be angry too, if someone threw a party in my house without asking. "Why did you decide to tell me about this now?" I asked. Timothy sighed. "Yesterday, I heard Brant and Paisley discuss that after gaining control of your finances, they plan to sell not only the house, but to force the old man to move into a nursing home. I'm sorry, but those are their words, not mine. They were talking about you, like a thing that needs to be moved out of the way. I can't be a part of that. I thanked him for his honesty and asked him if he would be willing to testify on the record if the case went to trial. To my surprise, he agreed. Brant has always been a materialist, Timothy said before leaving. But in recent years, it's become an obsession. All he talks about is money, status, possessions. I don't recognize the friend I grew up with. After he left, I sat on the terrace for a long time, pondering the strange twists and turns of life. About how the man I raised has become such a stranger that he's willing to send me to a nursing home for an inheritance. And about how strangers, neighbor Martha, graduate student Laura, even Brant's friend Timothy, showed more humanity and respect than my own son. Today, while working on another chapter of the book, I caught myself thinking that despite all the trouble with Brent, I'm happier than I've been in years. I once again have purpose in my life, interesting work, and fellowship with like-minded people. I no longer live in my own son's shadow, no longer adjust to his expectations, no longer feel guilty for not conforming to his idea of the perfect father. Breaking toxic relationships has proven to be a painful but necessary step. Many are hesitant to take it, especially when it comes to family. The social attitudes that blood is not water and family must be preserved at all costs are too strong. But sometimes the price is too high, your dignity, your identity, your right to be yourself. My book is progressing well. The editor is excited about the first chapters, and Laura and other young researchers are regularly bringing in new data that I can use in my work. Yesterday, Eleanor and I agreed to take a trip to Italy together next summer. She's never been to Florence, and I've long wanted to show someone my favorite places. On the table is an invitation to give a paper at an international conference in Boston in 2 months. The topic of my talk is Hidden Patterns of Interaction in Forest Ecosystems, a new look at old data. I have already bought tickets, booked a hotel, and have my presentation slides ready. All these facts are irrefutable evidence of my competence that Brant and Paisley will not be able to ignore. But more importantly, it's evidence of the full, active life I've built anew after 70 years. The sun has almost disappeared over the horizon, coloring the bay in deep purple tones. Soon it would be dark, and I would turn on the lights in the library and get back to work on the manuscript. Tomorrow, Alan and Margaret will be here. We'll be discussing a new undergraduate research program. The day after tomorrow is a meeting with the editor and lunch with Eleanor. Life goes on, filled with meaning, work, socializing. This is not the life I planned or expected when I was young, not the one I envisioned when I retired, but perhaps this life, real, authentic, free of other people's expectations, is the best gift I could have received at 74. I take one last sip of wine and rise from my chair. There are still a couple hours of work on the book ahead of me, and I want to finish the current chapter before bedtime. A strange thought comes to mind. If it hadn't been for Brant and Paisley's attempt to seize control of my life, if it hadn't been for their invasion of my home, I might have continued to exist alone, cut off from the scientific community, from new acquaintances, from the opportunity to share knowledge. Sometimes a crisis is a catalyst for change, a jolt that shakes us out of our rut and forces us to find new ways of doing things. In my case, this painful break with my son was the beginning of a new phase, unexpectedly rich and full of meaning. I turn on the light in the library, sit down at my desk and open my laptop. On the screen is an unfinished chapter on how seemingly imperceptible changes can trigger a process of renewal for an entire ecosystem. The topic seems particularly in tune with my current state of mind. Sometimes you need to lose something familiar to find a new balance that is more harmonious and sustainable. My fingers are running on the keyboard. My thoughts are forming into clear formulations. The plan for the next chapter is already forming in my head. I feel a rush of energy, the familiar excitement of an explorer who has hit an interesting trail. Life is beautifully unpredictable, and I'm grateful for this unexpected twist of fate, which showed me that true freedom begins when you stop living up to other people's expectations.